just when it tells us. How about that? Back live in action. Friday edition, orange and blue today. It is Cecil Lammey. It is Andrew Mason. Hope everyone out there is planning on a big weekend, hoping the Broncos are planning on a big run in free agency. And that's really what we're going to focus on today, Mace. All of our free agency previews are up at denversports.com. So make sure to check that out. Plenty of names. Not the obvious names either, because they're, and hey, everybody does this and hey, free agency or whatever, but there's some obvious names, there's some not so obvious names, and those are the players we're going to get into on today's program. Broncos free agency is going to be very important for them. I could make the argument, Mace, even more important for them than it is for any other team because of their draft situation. So free agency previews, free agency talk, yes, very important for the Broncos this year.
It's very important, and also I think it's important to have a prudent view of this, and we're going to get into this starting with the salary cap moves. Of course, the big thing is the Broncos did create $26 million of cap space today, but Cease, I don't think it's wise for the Broncos to spend every last dollar of cap space, nor do I think it's wise for them to have a bunch of backloaded contracts that kick big numbers into future years.
Right. They have to be careful and manage what they do because it's winning now and winning from now on. Isn't that an Elway quote?
Yes.
Which may make some people upset, but that's what makes sense. Now you just got to do it. So let's go over the salary cap moves today and give people kind of overview of what the Broncos are now working with in terms of cap space and their situation.
I mean, we've been talking about these, I feel like, for weeks and saying these were obvious moves, at minimum, massive restructures, potentially players out the door. Chase Edmonds gone. Broncos clear about $5.92 million of cap space. Ronald Darby gone. They clear just over $9.5 million of cap space there with Darby out. Graham Glasgow gone, $11 million of cap space. They're left with $6 million of dead money on Darby and Glasgow, but these are obvious moves. With Darby, you've got Damari Mathis, who filled in well. CB2 is his job basically at this point. And with Glasgow, he's a depth guy, struggled with injuries, never really got all the way back from the fractured ankle. I mean, these are just kind of obvious moves to get you to a certain point. And like I said, we've been talking about them for months. I think there were some people out there, Cease, that were really nervous that these moves might not happen, but you gotta trust. You gotta trust the people running things. It's not like they're sitting around twiddling their thumbs. I think everyone's been so used to the drip of leaking news from Dove Valley that people were going a little crazy saying, oh, when are they going to make a move? Oh, when are they going to move? They were going to make these moves all along.
They were going to make these moves all along. And Mace, I would ask then this, with Darby and Edmonds specifically, why not just a restructure? They can always bring it back. Then it's not done if you really wanted Chase Edmonds to be their, knockoff Alvin Kamara. But I always felt you could go to Edmonds and say, hey, you've got no guaranteed money. Here's $2 million guaranteed. That's your salary.
Yeah.
And he'd say, yes. Hi, Charlotte.
Yeah. Say hi.
Hi.
Yes. Go. And then she's gone. Yeah. And Chase Edmonds is gone too. But this is where it's a good question, because I thought that would be the kind of move that Chase Edmonds would be amenable to.
Mm-hmm.
Would saying, okay, I'll take this guarantee, which is more than I would have gotten otherwise, and then move on. As there's some big breaking news league wide, by the way. Ian Rappaport reporting that Carolina is trading up for the number 1 overall pick in the draft.
So there you go.
Yes. So Carolina is going to get its quarterback, the quarterback of its choice. Chicago trading down to number 9, multiple first rounders going back to the Chicago Bears, including the number 9 pick this year. So there you go.
And it's just a wise move for Chicago, and it's wise moves for Carolina. Get up, move up, and teams do that. When you see your guy, when you identify, the Chiefs moved up 16 spots for Pat Mahomes. The Bills moved up for Josh Allen. When you see your guy, go get your guy. And that may be the situation the Broncos are in next year, because they might be around the 9-12 range. So
Yes.
honestly, I don't know what you're doing on a Friday night, Mace, but like this sounds like something like we should examine the Carolina move, because it's a similar move the Broncos could be making next year, from 9-1, 10-1, 12-1 to get Caleb Williams.
Right. And the thing is, the Broncos could do that if they can't fix Russell Wilson. But to do that, they're going to be absorbing a heck of a lot of dead money, $85 million over 24 and 25 spread over those 2 years. So how do you make that a little easier to swallow? You do that with some carryover from this year in terms of under the salary cap. And that's why, right now the Broncos, according to Over the Cap, they're at $33 million of space. I've seen estimates that they're about $37 million over. So no matter what you're talking about, the mid $30 million range, it's well and good. But do you want to spend every last dime of cap space? Cash isn't an issue. This isn't about cash.
No.
Cash is no longer a discussion point for the Broncos. Cash is fine. It's about cap space now. And do you want to spend to the maximum this year in cap space, or would you rather have some carryover that might help, take a little bit of, make the pill a little bit more digestible for the Broncos? Like next year, for example, I believe Russell Wilson's dead cap figure, if the Broncos cut him with a post June 1 designation in 24, I believe it's $35 million in 24 and $49.6 million in 25. Well, that $35 million, if you carry over $10 million of space, you've knocked a little less than 1/3 off of that. It's not ideal, but it's helpful. It can get you there. And that's why I think if you're trying to play the hand of having an off-ramp from Russell Wilson in case you can't get him right, you've got to have these sorts of thoughts in mind as you go about this, instead of just going and spending willy-nilly.
You've got to have these thoughts in mind. And as you often say, it's about percentages. So yes, Russell Wilson's dead cap will take a large percentage of your cap. But if you have Caleb Williams on a rookie deal, now your percentage is, manageable. And that's what they have to be looking at. Our buddy Jason wants to know, what's the emblem on your hat?
Colorado Springs Switchbacks soccer team.
All right.
So gotta have some Colorado, right? I think I wore a Rapid shirt a couple of days ago. You gotta have something.
How's the snow out there?
Deep.
Okay.
I mean, they cleared the roads. I actually just was out and about a few minutes ago. Someone said I'm dressed like a mailman. Well, what it is I had a quick trip to run an errand, and then a quick 25 minutes at the gym. And so I've still got my t-shirt on from the gym, and I just put a blue jacket on just to look reasonable. So that's why I look the way I look. So
okay.
Yeah. But this is, I know there's a lot of people out there that want the Broncos to make kind of the big move, right? The big splash. I don't think the big splash is wise this year.
Well, the big splash to them, if they do make one, it better be on the offensive line. So let's jump into some free agency preview, because a couple of spots for me, McGlinchey at tackle. I know 49ers fans will be like, he was horrible last year. Okay, yes, that's fine. We all get it. But have you seen the Broncos situation? So offensive line is where we're going to focus probably for a lot of this show, Mace. But man alive, if there's a wish list, a Juwan Taylor, Mike McGlinchey, those two are on my list.
Yeah. Juwan Taylor, Mike McGlinchey. Could also even talk about Caleb McGarry as well there. The thing is, though, we're going to assume the Broncos are moving on from Draymond Jones. That seems pretty likely at this point. And if they do, if you sign McGlinchey or Juwan Taylor, I mean, you're talking about maybe getting nothing for Draymond Jones leaving, because the compensatory formula means that if you sign a comparable free agent to one that you lose, that third round pick, but if you sign a Mike McGlinchey, you might be canceling that out. So the
But Sean
one
Payton doesn't care about that.
uh
George
the,
Payton can collect
George
these
Payton
picks.
cares. Sean Payton might not care about that, and I think that's a mistake.
They ain't Matchbox cars. For me, it's a mistake to miss on your day 3 picks. We won't go into that, but they need offensive line help as soon as possible, and that's not coming through the draft. So they have to, and for what Sean Payton wants to do, the fastest path for Payton to implement what he wants to do, spread power, that's free agent offensive line help. And
But
maybe McGarry, McGlinchey, or Taylor's not the greatest answers, but they're the answer right now.
But the thing is, though, you might be looking at some answers that you can plug in there that allow you to do that, and you don't have to go into the compensatory calculus. Like, for example, Sean Payton's always been an inside-out builder on the offensive line. Typically emphasizes the 3 interior spots more than most coaches. So that's where someone like Andrus Peat, who is in line to be a cap casualty here, as the Saints formalize things with Derek Carr on that contract. Andrus Peat is a prime candidate to be a cap casualty in New Orleans. He's been hurt the last couple of years. That's the one thing you have to take into note on him, but he's also a relatively recent 3-time Pro Bowler who knows what Sean Payton wants to do. And so, I mean, for me, building the offensive line, if the Saints, and I don't see how the Saints can kind of fit in Andrus Peat. They've made some other moves. The move they made on Ryan Ramczyk basically ties them to Ramczyk, so he's not going anywhere.
Yes.
But right now, Andrus Peat is in line to get ziggied down there contract-wise. He'd be a perfect fit on the interior for the Broncos.
He would be. Other interior fits as we move from tackle to guard. I had Isaac Seumalo. We talked about him already on this show. Ben Powers as an option as well, and Nate Davis. You do have plenty of options. Hell, and there's a lot of bring them back guys, which I don't know what you feel about the bring them back guys. And Elijah Wilkinson is one of those bring them back guys. We'll go through all the different positions, but like Wilkinson was a player I made certain to highlight because I thought Elijah he got done wrong here. Shocker. But maybe like the Calvin Anderson deal. It's like, hey, did you really get the shot that you deserved? And maybe a cheaper option would be Elijah Wilkinson inside.
And there's another thing also to consider on that is it does take time for offensive linemen to develop. You and I have lamented about the lack of a developmental circuit in pro football.
Yes.
And so what happens quite a bit of the time here is that, you invest all this time in the first 4 years of developing a player, and then you move on and somebody else gets to reap the rewards, right? Because that player sometimes ends up developing into a starter. So that's where, I would consider hanging on to a Calvin Anderson type of player because you've invested the time in him. You're going to have to be highly intelligent to flourish in this offense. And we know that Anderson is that. And on top, he's got some athleticism to him. And on top of that, he's he's been in the building. I think he could be about to take the next step, especially if you just say, we're leaving you at right tackle. Don't ask Calvin Anderson to do something, to do something he's not very good at.
No, ask him and play to their players' strengths. We did have a question from David here in the chat room about center. Yeah, and that's something like Lloyd. Okay. I wrote about it. This came out February 27th, so it's in our archives, denversports.com. Garrett Bradbury, Rodney Hudson, Connor McGovern, Bradley Bozeman, Ethan Pochik, John Feliciano. So, like, you do have some center options. For me, Bradbury would be at the top. Again, you're spending if you're getting a Bradbury. But yes, if they got 3 offensive linemen somehow, some way, whether that's cheaper options or whatever. But if they filled tackle, guard, and center, I wouldn't be shocked at all, especially now that Glasgow's been cut.
How do you feel about Bang Jones?
Love it.
Love it too.
Yeah. Give me some power. Give me some athleticism up there. Like, and attitude. One thing that's missing from this offensive line, like Garrett Bowles tries that attitude, but it just comes across as bad play past the whistle. Like, you need those attitude guys. Jones would bring that to you.
Yeah, attitude and experience and leadership up front. And I think someone like Ben Jones, you'd view as say, okay, this is probably a 2-year solution. That's fine. Okay. 2 years is fine because with not having with not having a pick until the 3rd round this year, the guys that you're going to be looking at in the draft, most of these guys are going to be developmental guys. Like, okay, you get them in your system, you coach them up, you see where they're at in a year or two, right? So you're looking for players that can come in and kind of bridge that gap. That's why I'm okay. I'm okay with a Ben Jones. I'm okay. I am. I mean, if Taylor Lewan actually wanted to keep playing, I'd be okay giving him a look as well as part of that the Tennessee teardown that's going on right now. Rand Carthon.
Ran him out of town.
Yeah, he's running him out of town. He decided to run, not walk, to getting to starting to put his stamp on the organization and making some big changes. And there could be more coming. I mean, what if I'm not an advocate of Derrick Henry being on the team, but he could be on the market as well if you're looking for a running back.
Right. And we got a question in the chat room about trading Cortland Sutton for Derrick Henry. I mean, I think running back could just be addressed in the draft, and it can be addressed with third wave free agents. There's no guarantee Latavius Murray is going to get anybody to bite on him until August, like June, whatever. Like, okay, yeah, running backs, that one's a little easier to solve.
You kind of know Latavius is going to be out there if you need him.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. You love him and, he's there.
And maybe like we were talking about Chase Edmonds earlier, maybe if you were deciding, okay, we're going to throw $2 million guaranteed at a running back, maybe you just decided it was going to be Latavius at some point and not Chase Edmonds, which would be very fair and very valid. And you have other guys in there as well. Running backs are fungible assets, and
yes,
yeah, and that's and so. Yeah, I'm not an advocate of spending big. I will say when the Giants franchise Saquon Barkley, I breathed a sigh of relief because you know what? I didn't really want to see him coming to Denver. I didn't want to see the Broncos spending their money in that way.
Right. Second contract running back, so get you fired.
Yeah.
And build from the outside in. And I actually like what Rand Carthon's doing because there's certain teams that get to a level. Hell, Minnesota was there forever with Rick Spielman. It's like, we're good. You can't get over the hump. Tennessee, we're good. Ryan Tannehill, he's okay. And Derrick Henry. Remember when they didn't use Derrick Henry and then it'd get to like November and they'd be like, oh yeah, Derrick Henry. And then like for the last few years, they've used Derrick Henry. What? I feel like LeBron with JR, right? What? Huh? What were you doing?
They kept trying to diversify. They'd spend the first couple of months trying to diversify their attack. And then they realized, well, we've got the best running back in the league. Let's actually just pound him and use him down the stretch.
Yeah.
But the thing that we learned about the Titans, even with Derrick Henry, the thing we learned the last couple of years is that they could actually,
bless you.
Whoa, not a good. That wasn't a good one.
Bundle up in that snow.
Yeah. I hate that. Why does it feel like I'm the only person who sneezes on camera? I don't know. Anyway.
Anywho.
So my train of thought was this on the Titans. They showed down the stretch of 2021 that actually they could function without Derrick Henry. What they can't function without is a functional Ryan Tannehill, right? Because we saw when Tannehill went out this year, all of a sudden the whole thing collapsed. So it's all about the quarterback, right? Sort of brings us back to the original point about the quarterback, protecting the quarterback. Now the Titans and the Titans, they're only going to go so far with Tannehill anyway. So I mean, it's one of those organizations where they probably look and saying, "All right, it's probably time for a hard reset." And actually, if you're not going, if you don't want to avoid being in that Vikings spot where you're good but not great, you always have a chance but you can't get over the hump, then you've got to sometimes make a painful move. And something we've talked about here, Cease, is like if you're the Broncos. Is your ceiling that level, that Minnesota level, that Tennessee level of recent years? Is that your ceiling? And if that's your ceiling, then you don't need to go whole hog in on this year. You don't, and you shouldn't, especially with the potential anvil of a big number for Russell Wilson coming up if you can't get him right.
Yeah, it's a multi-year process.
Yeah.
I think the more we hammer that into the fans, like it's a multi-year process. Like we're all excited. We should be excited about next year, but it's not like next year they're back. Like, no, it's okay. This is the step. And then what's the next step? And along the way, you'll know Sean Payton is determined. And then you need to figure out what's up with George Payton. And that's where the spotlight in free agency will be on him. And we're going to know who's in charge, Mace. We already do, but we're going to know based on how much they do in free agency.
You know, the interesting thing, we know how Sean Payton's influenced by Bill Parcells, right?
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing is that when he went down to New Orleans, it didn't work. The rebuild did not happen in a Parcellsian way. And it was part of it was because you had this thunderbolt in Drew Brees who became available. And you had a fairly benign division that they were able to capitalize upon right away and win 10 games. And I think the other intangible factor that you had was the emotion of coming back to the city after Hurricane Katrina. I'd say, in terms of being on an emotional high, that probably bought the Saints 2 or 3 points a game that year.
Mm-hmm.
So this is more to me like Bill Parcells coming into New England in 1993, or Bill Belichick coming into New England in 2000, where maybe you're looking at a year that's kind of spent cleaning out some dead wood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Getting better at the margins, getting better on special teams, but sort of evaluating what you've got here, what's going to help you going forward for the long term. And I know that's not what Broncos it's not what Broncos country wants to hear because people are sick of losing. I get that, but it may well be the prudent process. Brad D says cost control players for 23 and 24, reload. I like that notion, honestly. And that's
Yeah.
I like the notion of players that you can bring in that can help you, that can maybe make you a bit tougher, that can bring some leadership and bring some intangibles. And you know what? If you do that, then you might be able to steal a 9 or 10 win season out of this when all is said and done, while not betraying a long-term plan. So I think there's ways to kind of accomplish all of that while also being prudent for the future. Because look, I think it's fair to say this team is not going to the Super Bowl this year. It's
Right.
not.
Right. And that's why, like with Tom here in the chat room, and
Yeah.
Tom, I agree with Tom. Like, I'm all about win now. I'm never about telling guys to tank or whatever. And the Broncos aren't doing that. But like, here's what I'll respond. Allow me to retort, Tom. And we appreciate Tom. He's one of our best in the chat room. When Kareem Jackson's on Good Morning Football this morning, and and they're like, hey, would you like to go to a contender? And he definitely. I mean, the Broncos aren't contenders. They're not contenders. They're not Super Bowl contenders. Are they playoff contenders? Sure. Could they get 9-10 wins with Sean Payton? Yes, sure. I feel really good about that. That's a different level, and I think Broncos fans, to your point, Mace, will appreciate the steps towards, what they're used to, but they can't make that one giant leap. There's no Superman coming to save them.
Right. We all thought it was Russell Wilson last year, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Russell Wilson was not Superman, and you can't assume that he's going to become Superman again. That's another thing as well. You can't assume that's going to happen. In fact, you're better off living under the assumption that maybe you can't get him fixed and making sure you've planned accordingly. Because here, if you do get him fixed, then you can build around that and you can be very happy and you can make things work. But this year, and I get that it's weird to say this about a quarterback who's going to turn 35 this year. It does feel something like a reset year, and then so that means a bunch of that means you may be bringing in some veterans that are 29 to 32, 33 years old on short, like 1 to 2 year 1 to 2 year contracts. There are ways you can structure these that'll give you some flexibility as well. I mean, I think back, and Broncos have had some success in past years. You remember Casey Wigman back in 08?
Mm-hmm.
And when I think of him when I think about Bang Jones, somebody who can step in, bring some stability, and maybe you get a really good season out of him. You kind of wring the one last ounce of really good football out of that player before he goes, and then in the draft, and do you trust Zach Strief to develop offensive linemen? Obviously you do, because you hired him as your own line coach. You trust him to make the most of those draft picks that you're going to use, those mid-round picks on offensive linemen, and take the 1 to 2 year development process on those guys.
Yeah, I'm not against those veterans. Was it Sean Phillips? My mind is playing tricks on me, but like Sean Phillips came in and got the 10 sacks for the Broncos.
Back in 2013, 10 years
ago. Yeah,
they,
so it's fine.
And you know when they brought him in? They had him in for a visit on the last day of the draft that year.
Mm-hmm.
And Jose points out Dan Copen and Will Montgomery, other guys from that era. They got a solid season out of Keith Brooking back in 2012.
Yeah.
They got a solid season out of Jimmy Leonard. They got a solid season out of Brandon Stokely coming back here toward the end of his career. I mean, you can find these guys. You just kind of have to be patient. You got to let the market settle. I mean, uh, I'll give you an example. Let's say you trade Cortland Sutton and you're looking for another receiver. Is there going to be a stampede of people towards Adam Thielen? I don't think so at this point.
Mm-mm.
But maybe you let the market settle and you get a nice value contract on Adam Thielen. He comes in, he helps you out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. And you
Yeah.
have to be patient in the second part of that, Mace, because we're mentioning, especially like with Monte and Coppin, you got to know who you are.
Yeah.
And for the love of God, last year, that Frankenstein offense that they had, they didn't know, they now no identity.
No
So
identity.
knowing Sean Payton, knowing what he wants, he'll know what to look for, even in that third wave of beyond the third wave of free agency.
I mean, you look at some of the guys the Saints have wrung something out of. A name that I wrote about overnight, you can read about at denversports.com, because in the cornerbacks, most of the cornerbacks I mentioned, Cease, were guys that had either played for Vance Joseph or Sean Payton, right?
Right.
And one of the names is a familiar name to us, Bradley Roby. Roby is he's settled in at this point in his career as a solid depth piece who can come in and start in a pinch, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Sean Payton, he's really, he went to New Orleans after Houston. It looked like he was washing out. He kind of revived his career as a role player in New Orleans. Sean Payton's really good at finding those guys that are on the back end of their careers, but they fit in perfectly. And again, that's another Parcells thing. Bill Parcells was very good at that when he would build his roster. It was you look at like his New England teams and Bill Belichick, a Parcells acolyte, also someone very good at bringing those last bits of football relevance, of good play out of veterans and plugging them into roles. I mean, you've heard the story of our friend Chad Brown, who, like, for example, when he went against the Broncos toward the end of his career while playing for the Patriots, had a very specific role to defend Rod Smith on third downs. And in a playoff game, that was his job. And Sean Payton is very good at doing that with veterans. And so, and most of those guys, were second, third tier guys that maybe teams didn't want to pay for anymore. And you could get them on a lesser deal, but they come in, they bring some experience, they settle the locker room. That's another thing. The Broncos need some good leadership in that locker room as well. And it can come from guys toward the end of the career, showing the young guys that you bring in the way. So that's,
How about a leader at the safety position in Von Bell? Because, and listen, I love Caden Stearns, love him. He hasn't proven he can stay healthy or play at an elevated level yet. Still believe in his development. I look at PJ Locke, like, appreciate his skill set, but I think there's a ceiling with Locke. Like, you get a Von Bell next to a Justin Simmons, especially because your rush can only be so much. VJ's going to have to devise ways to get the rush. They're going to have to send pressure. If you're solid on the back end, that's going to help, because your rush isn't going to have as many teeth as it used to.
It's not rush to set things up for coverage. It's going to have to be rush and cover. It's going to be, which sounds like you've got a team from Moscow that loses by less than the point spread, right? A Russian cover.
Russian cover.
You got a Russian cover. It's a tale as old as time, but the cover part of it's going to have to elevate itself a little bit. As Steve said, we need the Mandalorian in the locker room. This is the way. Yeah. They look. They either need no slogans or they need different slogans. Because last year, I am the storm. That didn't work at all. Like, it was funny to when I walked out of the locker room after the last game, and they still had that big mural on the wall, like, the warrior says, stares in the storm, says, I am the storm. And I thought, that's going to be gone. The basketball hoop's gone in the team room.
Team room,
at UCL Training Center.
Which never made a whole lot of sense to me. Like, it's not Google headquarters, okay? Like, and that room is a place of business. It's not a place where you could grab Nerf, get your Nerf game on.
Yeah, I mean, if it's up to me, the game room's gone too. Put the media back in there, for crying out loud.
I know. Please.
That was just silly and stupid. Made more work for everybody.
Yeah, I guess they're trying to get us to get our steps in or something. I don't know.
Well, no, it's actually the people who get the most steps in, during the off season ends up being players and coaches because when they do media availability, they have to schlep all the way across the facility. Again, there are some little things that at Broncos headquarters that you look at and are part of the equation of saying at some point there's going to be a new facility because there are little functional things that aren't as good as they could be. Right. I mean, I saw actually, I retweeted a video from the Milwaukee Brewers clubhouse today and of a player like doing a speed skating thing around the clubhouse at spring training. And if you look in there and you see like a huge clubhouse and you've got like, comfy chairs in the middle of it and all that. And I'm like, this is what, when players talk about wanting more space in the locker room, this is what they're talking about. That's what they're looking for. That's what they want.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And you're only going to get that with a new facility probably. So, but again, that's another discussion entirely. But basically, Cease, when it comes down to free agency, O-line. That's what this needs to be about.
Yes.
And if you lose Draymond Jones, you're probably going to have to find another a defensive lineman that you can plug in. But to me, I'd say, look, that potential solution might be Deshaun Williams brought back on a short-term contract. He's one of those guys. He's turned 30. So maybe there's not going to be much interest in him, but he has value to you for depth, and then use one of those 2 third-round picks on an interior defensive lineman.
Yes. That's the answer for your defensive lines in the draft.
Yes.
It is.
Because there's going to be quality there.
Line is not in the draft based on where you're at.
The quality is there on interior defensive line right around where the Broncos pick, not on the offensive line. You could look, someone like Keanu Benton could come in and probably be a day one starter for you right there at the top of the 3rd round.
As we get the news announced about the number 1 pick being dealt, Mace, as we wrap up today's show, is there any surprise moves? We're both saying O-line. Would there be a surprise for maybe a wide receiver or something that we wouldn't normally associate? We've talked about Dalton Schultz. Like, is there a tight end coming? Is there anything that, because on Monday we'll be talking about who left or who they got. I mean, legal tampering is open. So yeah, Monday's show is going to be about what's happening, not like what could happen.
Well, we haven't talked about backup quarterback. I don't think that's much of a surprise, but I could see a move there. I'll tell you what, I'm going to be writing about punter over the weekend. That's the sort of thing that could be a surprise move to bolster the special teams. Again, the Parcelsian philosophy of the first place when you're a new coach that can come in and make a difference is special teams, where you can have a clear upgrade. And the Broncos have been bottom feeders at special teams for the last few years. Mike Westhoff being the assistant head coach tells you serious business for special teams on this Broncos team. That the fact that Westhoff is Sean Payton's right-hand person tells you a lot about where special teams is going to be valued this year. So, and even like Lil Jordan Humphrey is a guy who might be able to help on special teams.
Yeah.
That's something that they're going to be serious about that. And they're going to view special teams, Cease, as a way that they can steal some games at the margins that were lost in the last few years to get this club back to respectability. So don't be surprised if there is a specific special team signing or two in the first week or two of free agency.
All right, that is a wrap for Orange and Blue today, Monday through Friday, 3:30 p.m. Mountain Time. He is Andrew Mason. You follow him on Twitter at Mace Denver. I am at Cecil Lammey, saying the excitement is just about ready to get started. So, gentlemen, start your engines.
Start your illegal tampering.
There you go. He's Andrew Mason. I'm Cecil Lammey. Be safe, be kind, know that you're appreciated. Stay tuned. And as always, stay frosty.